So from here, I greet you throughout the Caribbean. We have many members and participants registered from throughout the Caribbean, and we have a cadre of people participating from COP15, the Biodiversity COP from Montreal. Let me acknowledge when I say we, who else is here? Here is Dr. Natalie Budram. She is the Biodiversity and Ecosystems Program Manager of Canary. Then we have Dr. Renata Clark. She is the Sub-Regional Coordinator for the FAO Sub-Regional Office in Barbados. This Sub-Regional Office in Barbados covers the entire CARICOM region from Belize to Suriname, and she is heading a multidisciplinary team of different specialists in the area of agriculture, fisheries, and forestry. Then we have with us Mrs. Marilyn Hadley. She is the Canary Forestry Program Advisor, and many of you may know her and remember her. She was the first female conservator of forest in the Caribbean, and she is now the program advisor to Canary in questions of forestry. Then we have with us Dylan Palmer, who will speak later in the program. And with this now, I would kind of like to introduce you quickly to the purpose of this meeting. It is about a launch of a publication which FAO prepared together with Canary. And you can read it or see it as a kind of a roadmap to make forest and forestry more in the Caribbean more resilient, to prepare the forestry sector to contribute to adaptation and mitigation of climate change, and at the same time also protect the infrastructure, the environment of the islands against potential and upcoming climate change. With this, I would like to hand over to Dr. Renata Clark to speak and give some words to this launch. Over to you, Renata.
Thank you, Klaus. Greetings to all colleagues and partners. I'm really pleased to be joining you here this afternoon to talk about this important issue about sustainable forests. Caribbean rural livelihoods are heavily dependent on natural resources, including forest-based goods and services. The region's forests provide timber and fuel wood, as well as non-timber forest products, such as food, medicine, and handicraft. Globally, forested areas house over 80% of terrestrial biodiversity, and in the Caribbean, forested locales are also important for hunting and ecotourism. Furthermore, forests are critical for ecosystem services, such as provision of water, slope stabilization, and the protection of soils. Climate change impacts in the Caribbean include higher ambient temperatures and more extreme weather patterns. For example, more intense hurricanes and increased likelihood of droughts and floods. The question we have to ask ourselves is, how will climate change affect the region's forests? Will Caribbean forests continue to provide the goods and services that we're accustomed to? What can we do to make the region's forest ecosystems more resilient against climate change? Words I always hear from Klaus is, we know that by nature, forests in the Caribbean are resilient. The natural forests we see on the islands have regenerated after hurricanes. However, we are also aware that degraded forests, if hit by a hurricane, regenerates back to the same level of degradation that the ecosystem had shown before the hurricane. So this really underscores the importance of preventing degradation and restoring these ecosystems as part of a climate resilience thrust. This is equally important given the role of the region's forests in climate mitigation. Trees and forests, as long-lived individuals and ecosystems, by their very nature, are resilient. They're designed to be able to cope with the many challenges they face during their long life cycle. The natural resilience of trees is an asset that foresters and farmers can make use of by integrating trees and forests into agriculture production systems to make them more resilient and productive. Trees, either planted or naturally regenerated, can protect agricultural crop and coastlines, roads, and infrastructure. In summary, trees and forests protect the environment around them and are well suited to be integrated into human production systems and to make these more resilient. However, this is unlikely to happen on its own and will require active participation of all stakeholders as well as adequate financing. This includes forest conservation financing, financing to invest in forest-based livelihood opportunities, and financing to integrate trees and forests into social protection systems to make the islands as a whole more resilient to climate change. This Caribbean strategy for climate resilient forests and rural livelihoods, prepared by CANARI, documents the current state of discussion around this issue. It was compiled through a dedicated review of the literature, a detailed analysis of past initiatives and projects, extensive consultation with governments and civil society stakeholders across the Caribbean, and finally, it has been validated at a regional workshop in Barbados in 2019. As such, it is an excellent foundation and a valuable stepping stone to integrate sustainable forest management and climate change resilience. Please make good use of it. And with that, I'd like to thank you, and I look forward to the outcomes of this discussion.
Thank you, Renate. The keyword, you mentioned it, or one of the keywords you mentioned it, is financing. It is a strategy which is supposed to help us to develop avenues to support these changes we are looking for. With this, I would like to give the word to Ms. Marilyn Hadley, former Conservator of Forest of Jamaica and now Program Advisor to CANARI. Marilyn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Klaus. Good afternoon, everybody in the Caribbean and those coming in from Canada. In addition to my being a program advisor, I was a former chairman of CANARI, so I have deep connections like Klaus with CANARI. And CANARI, as you know, has been around for quite a while. I can't believe it's so long, but it's over 30 years there in the region. And one of the key players in promoting participatory management and governance of our forests, of our natural resources in the Caribbean. In Jamaica, when I was the CEO of Conservative Forestry Department, and we started to look at to move to be involved in the community in our forest management, we started to hear the word participatory. That was new to us. It was CANARI who introduced it to our staff, to all of us, brought us into the light to see that we need to start working with the people in managing our forests. When CANARI introduced that to us then, now we have about 18 different local forest management committees based around the forest, people who are dependent on the forest, who are working great to help us protect the forest. You know that we have come a long way as foresters. We have come from the era when foresters, we only spoke to the trees, which was good. But now we are having conversation, we are having discussions with the people, with the community, and talk to them. We're getting involved in how they manage, how we manage together the natural resources. And Canary as a group over the years has always focused on the well-being of the land and the people, rather than just narrowly looking at the economic growth that you could get from looking at the land and the natural resources. The sustainable use of our natural resources by our Caribbean people for their livelihood has always been a key strategy in Canary. Canary has recently launched their strategic plan for their 10-year strategic plan. The strategic plan looks at from the year 2021 to 2030 and has 5 main strategic directions, looking at resilience building, looking at biodiversity and ecosystem, equity and justice, participatory governance of our natural resources, and also looking at transformation on how to work with stakeholders. In looking at participatory budgeting, Canary at the moment is also, with funding from the EU, undertaking a project that is looking at what are the possibility of getting participatory involvement of the civil society communities in Jamaica involved in actually preparing the budget for the forest sector. So we are currently looking at the processes that's on and then speaking with the CSO to see how can they get involved in not only assisting with management, but in looking at how the funds are allocated. So that is one key area that the Canary is also pushing to get participatory management involved right down to the ground. The strategy for climate resilience, forest and rural livelihood is a comprehensive and timely document. It fits right in with Canary's new 10-year strategic plan and will definitely be important in the process of implementing the plan. The biodiversity and ecosystem program focuses on support of the local and natural resources and look about the stewardship. How are we going to be managing those resources? It's looking at promoting the landscape management, looking at inclusivity in the management of the landscape, and protecting sustainable management and restoring the ecosystems as we have them now, and strengthening the institutional framework and mechanism and the knowledge generated in sharing. So as Canary continues to work with the communities in the Caribbean and implementing this strategy, we really want to tell everybody, thank you for participating. Thank you in the development of not just a strategy, but also your input into the Canary strategic plan for 10 years. And we continue to work to see how we can all work together. And today, I'd really like to thank everybody for joining in. I hope it will be a fruitful gathering. At the end, we can always say, oh, we spoke about it, we are going to do something. And the key shot is we are going to do something. We are very good at talking and having nice meetings and producing plans. But I think our key aim from here, what we should take away is what it is we are going to do. So on behalf of Canary, welcome again and hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you, Klaus.
Thank you, Marilyn. You stressed the fact of participation, and you mentioned that it is all right for the foresters to talk to the forest. And that reminded me of when I started to work in forestry. I did forest inventories, and an elderly colleague told me because it's a very lonely job, there's nothing wrong in talking to the trees. But when the trees start back to you, then it's time for you to get out of the forest. That's the big difference now, because basically in this participatory approach, we are basically begging or asking our partners from all sides to really contribute. And being in this tradition, we would now like to invite a colleague from the forestry department from Grenada, who is currently at the COP15, and we give special thanks to this CARICOM Secretariat for making this connection available and being basically the focal point or the gathering points of the Caribbean delegations at the COP15. So I would like to introduce Mr. Dylan Palmer from the Forestry Department and Grenada. Please, Dylan, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Are you hearing me clearly?
Yes.
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, so it's a pleasure being here. Been able to attend this session. Um, this is my first time being at the CBD COP 15. It's a lovely opportunity to be here to get to understand the different ways in which the convention is run in relation to us heading towards the framework, the global biodiversity framework. In terms of the forest related issues, I've just been able to get some little snippets because I've been attending different meetings and trying to get onto the different targets of that GBF process. So colleagues who I've spoken before, Ms. Clark and Ms. Hadley, touch on some of the issues of forest being resilient, linking people and forests, and also a participatory approach. So here at the COP 15, much emphasis is placed on ecosystem restoration and protecting 20 to 30% of degraded forest ecosystems as relates to terrestrial, also inland water, coastal and marine ecosystems. So there's a lot of debate around protecting, ensuring that 20 to 30% of our degraded areas, whether it be the forest or whether it be marine protected areas, are protected within this GBF framework. Another key point in terms of forest was capacity building. Capacity building we see is an issue that cross-cuts different islands, whether it be developing states, small island developing states, or developing countries. So we see capacity building and development is a key part for us to use it in protecting our forest ecosystems. Building capacity is foremost important, especially with the younger generation, to build a capacity on why our forests are important to us. You know, the services and functions they provide. So we can allow them to build a capacity and for them to become managers of such resources and pass on this information, this technical and scientific information to future generation. Another key point coming out from discussions relating to forest and climate change is having the participatory approach of the indigenous people and local communities. We see that the indigenous people and local communities are sort of the pioneers in protecting primary forest ecosystems. And there was a Primary Forest Alliance launch, which looked at, how we can use ways to protect our forests by using our indigenous and local communities as champions in preserving and protecting these critical ecosystems. So these are some of the main issues coming out from COP 15 as it relates to capacity building, as it relates to also resource mobilization. A lot of countries, especially our small island developing states, are championing the cause for why small island development states should be one of the key receivers of funds from the global community in protecting our biodiversity, which in turn is also protecting our forests as well. So resource mobilization is actually a very hot topic as we speak right now in discussion against the developing countries and developed countries and we who are developing countries, and finding that gap, that bridge where we can come together and have that fruitful discussion where our small and developing states can be recognized as being very vulnerable to the effects of climate change and ways that we can access the funds to protect our environment. So there's a lot of heated discussions going on as it relates to accessing funds and resource mobilization. So these are some of the main striking points coming out from here at this COP 15 meeting. So we hope that the GBF will be something that will be very realistic, that will be very timely, and that would allow for the protection of biodiversity in general. So these are some of the main key issues that relates to forest and climate change happening here at the COP 15. So I thank you for listening, and I turn it back over to the host.
Thank you, Dylan. You mentioned the importance of capacity building, especially in small island states. And I remember that many people kind of had questions about the relevance of the forest on small islands. And I think it is, although these forests may not be kind of relevant for the world's climate, they are very relevant for what is happening on the islands. And the best example for that is that all the islands who have mountains and mountainous areas, you can almost say that more than 80% of the potable water for the entire population derives from this forest. So basically you can conclude without this forest, there wouldn't be much life or living possibilities and opportunities on the island. Now, this kind of illustrates the need to have a strategy. And this strategy is also something which is basically sets the framework how the financing aspect could be addressed. And with this, I would like to give over to Dr. Budram. She led the preparation of this study. She is the senior technical officer in Canary and is working with biodiversity and environmental programs. And I would like to give her the word to explain a little bit more details about what is written and given in this strategy. Over to you, Natalie.
Okay, so good afternoon again, everyone. Can someone confirm that they are hearing me?
Yes, we hear you well.
Great. Okay, so as Klaus said, one second, there we go. I am here to actually talk about the strategy that is the meat or the focus of this launch today. And as you all are aware, this is the Caribbean strategy for climate resilient forests and rural livelihoods. And we have a kind of an unwieldy acronym, but we're still putting it in there. So at least you'll see that in between. But it's our strategy for building climate resilient forests and rural livelihoods. And as Klaus indicated, it was prepared by Canary for the FAO. So I am sure many of you, if not all of you, are familiar with Canary, but we are a nonprofit technical institute operating across the Caribbean since 1989. And our mission is focused on promoting and facilitating stakeholder participation in the stewardship of natural resources. As Marilyn has already spoken to, we work in a number of program areas. I manage our biodiversity and ecosystems program area. We also focus on participatory governance, resilience, equity, and justice. And the strategy that we have prepared and are launching today cuts across all of our program areas. So before I go into my presentation, I just want to say a big thanks to all of you. I know we will do a final thanks at the end. Thank you for your time for being here. I know everyone is looking forward to Morocco beating France. Aha, evil grin. But thanks for your time here. Thank you for our colleagues at FAO for facilitating the launch and the partnership in developing the strategy. Thank you to Marilyn, our programs advisor in Forestry, for being here, Canary staff. But I also want to give a special shout out to the Caribbean delegates who are joining us from COP15, from the Biodiversity Conference. We have been trying to organize this, and my colleagues from the CARICOM Secretariat and from the government of Grenada have worked hard to actually get this link established to COP15. And we know we have our colleagues from the Sorry.
Hearing you.
Okay. Are you all hearing me now?
Yes, you're back.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right. So yes. So thanks for everyone for being here and their support. Now, what I'm trying to do today is just very briefly highlight some of the main issues as it pertains to forestry and climate change, but it's already been pretty well covered by all of the previous speakers. What we want to emphasize is that the strategy, it's a holistic strategy. It's a wholesome approach to deal with some of the issues that we are being faced with. And at the end of the presentation, we want to give you an idea of what we hope you can do. What can you as civil society, academics, regional, government agencies, especially of those who are focal points for the different MEAs and the different funding streams, what you can do or what you can assist with in terms of the implementation of the strategy. Now we are talking forestry, right? And of course, the wider discussion that we globally that is more focused is of course on biodiversity, terrestrial biodiversity. So it's not as if we're thinking anything in isolation. We are just zeroing in from terrestrial biodiversity to go specifically to talk about forests, forestry, and forest-based livelihoods under the umbrella of terrestrial biodiversity. So this is Canary, and you know we love feedback. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute, and I'm going to ask my colleague Aaron, to please put a quick Mentimeter in the poll. And you always see the link. And we're just asking a very quick question.
Sorry, I didn't hear you clearly.
Sorry, no, not you, Dylan. I meant to say Aaron. My bad.
Okay,
What
no
are you
problem.
most concerned about? As in, what are our colleagues joining this call? What are you most concerned about regarding the impact of climate change on our Caribbean forests? So if you all can just go to the link and type in a couple words, let's see what rises to the top. Let's see what you all are most concerned about. And if the topic is something that it's relatively new to you, our previous speakers, Dylan, Marilyn, Dr. Clark, they've all outlined some of those issues. What resonated with you all? Okay, so we're seeing some of the things that are in people's heads right now. Regeneration, loss of biodiversity. We have people who are worried about wildfires, agreed. These are all critical issues. Regeneration, food insecurity, agreed. Agreed. Forest fires, loss of unique species. Yes, our region has a number of endemic species which are under threat. Let's see, what else is coming up? A lot of reference to species loss, mining, and I imagine that's coming from some of our colleagues from perhaps Guyana, Suriname, Jamaica, invasive species, agreed. Drinking water available, exactly. Exactly, high elevation habitat, good. Lack of seed source, local communities, drought. Okay, good, great. One last look to see what's coming up. Okay, lack of forestry capacity and social justice. Okay, so Aaron, I think we can close it off, but thank you all for that specific feedback. And yes, those are all issues we're going to talk about now. So let me reshare my screen. Okay, my screen is being seen, colleagues? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so very briefly, the impacts of climate change on Caribbean forests, which we've all spoken to and you all just spoke to as well. And I'm just highlighting one or 2 points here and there. There are many more, of course. We have to be concerned about what higher temperatures and drought means for forests. We're going to be looking at things like species composition changes, changes in phenology, that's plant fruiting and flowering, how our pollinators will be behaving. Climate change, we're going to be looking at reduced food sources and habitat for our wildlife. We will look at an abundance of species that are better adapted to higher temperatures, which unfortunately constitutes a lot more invasive species. As many of you have mentioned, we are very concerned about wildfires, forest fires, shift in the range of forest types. So someone was talking already about high elevation forests. Higher temperatures means that their range or the geographic space that they can occupy would be reduced. And overarching, of course, we're looking at how all of that impacts on our forest-based livelihoods in the Caribbean region. And then just very quickly, we are all familiar with what happens with hurricanes, tree mortality, thinning of forests, subsequent impacts in terms of flooding and so forth. These are all things that we are aware of. And as Klaus always says, yes, our forests are resilient, but if they were degraded to begin with, what is going to take place after hurricane events is a function of the previously degraded forests. In terms of sea level rise, just very briefly, we know we'll be looking, for instance, at the loss of area in terms of mangrove forests, especially if there isn't enough land space, so if there's infrastructure. So whereas with sea level rise, you will have a shift in the geographic range with our mangrove forests moving further inland. If there's infrastructure there, that cannot happen. We are dealing with things like saline intrusion, which might affect other forest types. So just a very quick flavor. I am sure all of you could list a number of other points that are very relevant and of concern to us here in the Caribbean. So we're going to be talking about climate resilience, and I've stuck in what is the usual definition that we use within this community, looking at the system ability to accommodate, recover from the effects of a hazard, including through the preservation and restoration of its essential basic structures and functions. But what I'm saying to you is we're not fussing too much about the terminology. What we are really concerned about, and we're addressing a wide range of issues in the strategy, is us thinking about how to manage our forests given climate change impacts on them so that they can continue to provide their essential goods and services, including climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. So that's a mouthful. But what the point is that I'm trying to drive across is that right now, I am sure practically all of you are working on what we call ecosystem-based adaptation or nature-based solutions or green infrastructure as adaptation measures to climate change. And that's great. But we have to know that we are depending on our forests to do all of that, but our forests are not in good shape. So what it is that we need to do is to ensure the health of our forests. We need to ensure there's enough forests so that then we can use these goods and services that they are providing, including those relevant to climate change adaptation and mitigation, right? And at the same time, while we are protecting them, so we could use them for climate change adaptation and mitigation, we have to know that they are also being impacted by non-climate threats, overharvesting, deforestation, invasive species. So there's a double and triple whammy that's happening right now that's affecting our forests, and we need to guard and protect them against that so that they can continue to help us and support us. And then as we've been saying throughout so far, how do we support the people who directly depend on forests for their livelihoods? So how does climate change affect them? And what can we do so that they can continue to have a livelihood supported by forests? How can they adapt? How can they climate proof their enterprises and their practices to be able to still derive a livelihood from our forests? So now we come to the Caribbean strategy for climate resilient forests and rural livelihoods, which we've developed. And what we've done is organize the strategy as in what we should be doing in terms of different themes. We are focusing, for instance, on resilient forest products, livelihoods, and local green enterprises. We are looking to the point I just made. We need to make sure our forests are healthy. That's what I have in point 2, so that once they are healthy and resilient, they can then support point 3, which is our forest ecosystem services for climate change adaptation and mitigation, and of course, all the other goods and services they provide. A key issue that has come up while we were doing the consultations and discussions is talking about disaster resilience for the forestry sector. How do we make sure our forestry officers can execute specific functions or continue to do their work in support of recovery after hurricanes, for instance? And of course, we'll be talking a little bit about frameworks, tools, and mechanisms for climate resilience. So as Klaus and others would have indicated, this project, this strategy was done through a strategic alliance between the FAO and Canary. The work has been done a little while ago, so some of our forestry officers are relatively familiar with the content, and we have actually been working a little bit in terms of concept notes and moving forward, etc. But it was formally published this year. And it was widely consulted. There were wide consultations when we did this with civil society, academia, government, etc. And what you would notice when you go through it is that there was a specific focus on Dominica, Grenada, Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Haiti. And that was just a function of FAO programming framework. So we started with those countries and focused on them. But since then, we've been talking to the other countries, especially across the Caribbean SIDS. And these are issues widespread across the Caribbean. We do note, however, we have engaged less with the continental Caribbean countries. So I am sure that there are aspects pertinent to them which are less of an issue within the small island developing states that are represented here. What we want this strategy to do, how we hope you all can use it, is that we want to identify what the needs are. But what we try to do is we talk to people, these are the needs, but then these were some of the solutions that they've implemented. And what we've done in the strategy is highlighted which worked, what worked where, and therefore has the potential to be replicated. So some examples I know offhand, there's been some great work done in Dominica by the forestry officers there in terms of management of invasive species. And the lessons learned and work there can be reapplied across different Caribbean islands. And the way we've organized the strategy is in terms of, we have the 5 themes that I just mentioned, we've mentioned goals, we've dug down to give objectives, program areas, and we even gone so far as to say, okay, this is a specific little project that you can work on, or these are specific activities. We've spoken about if you are executing X project or X activity, these are possible partnerships and funding sources. So my first message to you is that the strategy is a resource. It's an information resource in terms of what the issues are, what some of the solutions are, and how you can go about implementing those solutions through partnerships, through exploring different funding sources. The idea behind it too is that it is a multi-scalar document. So for example, if you are a CSO implementing community level initiatives, there might be 1 or 2 aspects at the activity or project level that you might want to focus on. Our colleagues from the different governments might want to look at it and extract bits and pieces relevant to their country for national level initiatives. We do have our colleagues at CARICOM, at the OECS Commission here as well. There is scope for regional initiatives. And we are hoping that this strategy can be used to design, or in the case of CSOs, for instance, advocating for relevant programs and projects at these different levels. And even if we don't you end up using this strategy and not necessarily partnering with Canary or FEO, we would of course love to work with you all on this. But even if you take this and say, hey, this makes sense, let us try to do it, please use this strategy as best as you can. All right, so I'm just going to quickly run through some of the themes and objectives, highlighting some of the possible ideas to kind of spark some ideas in terms of what you all might be interested in working on or collaborating on. So in terms of one of the themes which focuses on resilient forest products, livelihoods, and local green enterprises, one of the things we've realized through the consultations and through review of the literature, etc., is that there is a great need to assess and share knowledge on the climate vulnerabilities of the different forest goods and services. And then we have to think about, do we need to shift gears? If we depend on X plant, but that plant might be wiped out because it cannot survive higher temperatures, what other goods and products can we utilize from our forests to support our livelihoods? How can we strengthen our livelihoods, our forest livelihoods and enterprises in terms of technical expertise, methodologies, and processes, so that from the downstream perspective, they are also supported? And under this theme of resilient livelihoods, we need to have a better idea. We need to do a little bit more research, including local knowledge research, to get an idea of what climate change is doing to the livelihoods and enterprises. A key aspect that, as we need specific projects on is, how do we think about protecting forest germplasm? So we know we have germplasm centers for certain key crops, for example, cocoa, etc. But what about our forest species that are also valuable? How do we help our forest-based livelihoods, our people who depend on the forest, how do we help them to adapt to climate change? How can we climate-proof their enterprise? And if we need to switch gears and focus on different species, for example, for our use, which are the climate resilient non-timber forest products, NTFPs, or timber products? But apart from these specific climate aspects, what we have to remember is that throughout this process, we need to think about our bread and butter forestry activities. We need to be thinking about things like capacity for timber harvesting. We need to be thinking about when we're harvesting our non-timber forest products, what about standards and certification? And then we come to theme 2, which focuses on the resilient forest ecosystems. And what we are saying is, what I've been saying throughout this presentation, is to manage these ecosystems, we need to manage these ecosystems to better support climate change adaptation and mitigation. But a key aspect of this is that we need more information. This has come across very strongly. So this theme actually has a very strong research focus, as suggested by our foresters, by our academics. We've actually had specific sessions within various academic conferences where we've gotten a sense of where the priorities are. So in terms of managing our forests for climate change, there is a strong need for research. And by that, we mean both academic and local knowledge. In terms of forest cover data, standardized data sets, downscaling climate models to map specific forest ecosystem and site impacts. So basically, we need to have fine scale information. We need to think about and look at specifically how our at-risk ecosystems are being affected. Cloud forests, dry forests. We need to look at the impact of climate change on small range and endemic forest species. And we need to then think, okay, we have climate change, but then how is climate change also being exacerbating existing threats such as invasive species and wildfires? And then what our foresters are saying is that we need more fora or more communities of practice where we can not only generate this knowledge, but share this knowledge amongst the practitioners to better use and support our forest health. And a key issue that's coming up as well is managing invasive plant and animal species in our forests. And while we are doing work in carbon sequestration, one of the things that has come up is how do we make this more participatory? As you all know, that is probably the most popular word that we are using today in our launch. Okay, 1 second while I drink some water. Okay, so theme 3 looks at using, this is what we are actually doing the most of. So I'm not telling you all anything new. I am pretty sure everybody here in some form or fashion is involved in a project or an activity to use forest ecosystem services to facilitate climate adaptation. At Canary, for instance, we have a number of micro grants under different projects where we have enterprises and community groups working on restoration, hillside reforestation, riverine, riparian zone restoration. So this is taking place, but we wanted to make sure to note that this is still an area where we need more. A little bit more that we need to focus more than the former point is in terms of building the climate resilience of agricultural and urban areas. I often joke that people feel we are rural in the Caribbean, but we do have our own urban jungles. And within those urban spaces, we do need to think about how we use trees as green infrastructure to do things like help lower temperatures within those areas. So specific projects that the strategy is suggesting, again, yes, focusing on the hillsides for slope stabilization, protection of areas such as riparian zones, bridging protected areas using climate resilient agroforestry, and greening urban areas. Okay, so this is the second to last theme, which looks at disaster resilience. So what we want to make sure is that our forestry stakeholders, including both civil society and our forestry departments, are able to better handle their activities after disaster events occur. And part of that is preparation. making sure that any specific disaster management frameworks for the forestry sector are developed and updated as needed. So there's a plan in place once a particular disaster event has occurred. What we are also concerned about is civil society and what happens to them. This is ringing very true right now, because as many of you are aware, there have been some really intense rainfall events here in Trinidad over the last couple of weeks. And one of the major roadways leading to an area called the Nariva Swamp has been washed away. And right now we are actually working with a number of small enterprises in the Nariva Swamp, people who are carrying out ecotourism activities, and they don't have a livelihood and an income coming in right now. I mean, literally last night, a couple of us were chatting with them, and they don't have resources right now because their source of income has been removed indirectly through climate change, intense rainfall, and the destruction of infrastructure. So what can we do to protect these small enterprises? Do we need to look at things like micro insurance schemes, or what sort of social protection mechanisms? So under this theme, that was disaster. And this is the last theme, which looks at enabling environment, frameworks, methodologies, etc. And what we want to do in terms of, we are saying we need to develop and update forestry frameworks to be more climate resilient. We need to spend time to mainstream forest ecosystem values into national economic decision-making. And of course, countries like Grenada know all about this. There's currently a large-scale Grenada National Ecosystem Assessment going on, which is a valuation study which aims to do just this. Of course, everybody has been talking about climate finance, and we also need to ensure that we utilize innovative economic tools for sustainable financing, including PES, and my brain has just frozen in terms of what payment for ecosystem services, right? So sustainable mechanisms for those type of things. Okay, so that's it. I know I've been talking, but I've told you what the strategy is about. And now I'm going to tell you what we need you to do. We need you all to use this strategy as an information source. Civil society in particular, when you are communicating with your parliamentary representatives or otherwise advocating, yes, general climate issues, but we can advocate and communicate around the specific forestry issues in terms of climate change. For those of us in civil society and academia, we have some projects within that strategy that we can flesh out and develop and work together on. Our academics that are joining us today, these are some of the key focal research areas we need you all to focus on, and there may be others, but this is what our foresters and civil society need help with. In terms of what we need our government agencies or MEA focal points, regional agencies, please feel free to use this strategy to design national or regional projects or partner to do so, including with Canary or with FAO. There have been proposals that are, of course, going through the usual channels. I want you all to, or we want you all to recognize how critical this issue is. And you all know the normal mechanisms and how approval is needed and endorsements and so forth. Please consider when these things come before you, these are critical areas we need to divert and ensure resources are being allocated to. And as we have our colleagues, of course, from the COP15 event, who again, we're very grateful for joining, continue doing what you all are doing. I know you all are there, arduously poring over all the documents and as much as possible trying to ensure our SIDS issues are being reflected. So with that, again, we just would like to do a second poll, again, just to break it up a little bit. And Aaron will be sharing a link. We're actually going to go into a Q&A session right now, but while we do the Q&A session, if you all can answer a few questions, we will share the results of that before we close today, so you all can get a feel. Basically, what we wanted to find out is what you all are focusing on. So I think we kind of anticipate some of the patterns, but of some of the topics that we've mentioned today, it would be good to see what you are already working on. So therefore, it'll give everybody an idea of what topics still need more attention as opposed to others. And then if there's any specific topic we haven't really highlighted in great detail, if you guys would like to highlight that in the second question in the poll. So please go ahead and do that. But at this time, I will turn over to Klaus to moderate our Q&A session.
Thank you, Natalie, for your interesting presentation and giving us a flair of what is inside this strategy. Now the floor is open for those who would like to say something. You have a small hand here, which allows you to indicate that you would like to have the word. So please make use of it. Or you turn on your camera and show your face, put up your finger and indicate that you would like to say something.
Or if you're feeling shy, feel free to type a comment or a question in the chat, and one of my colleagues will read it out. So the floor is open, guys, and I know you all are not shy.
Hi, Natalie. Just to bring up a comment that came up during your presentation from Christian Torres. He just indicated that there are little or very few seed banks in the Caribbean, and unfortunately, and he indicated that's something that needs to change for genetic preservation.
Great, that's an excellent point. Excellent point. Alwyn's hand is up, Klaus, if you're missing that. Alwyn from St. Lucia.
Alwyn, done, yeah, St. Lucia.
Alwyn, sorry, Alwyn. Hi.
Hey, good afternoon to all.
Good afternoon.
It's a very comprehensive strategy and presentation, I must say. We in St. Lucia, the Forestry Department, and I know both you, Natalie, and Klaus have some familiarity with what has happened in St. Lucia, what is happening in terms of forestry. We've worked with, FAO, for quite a long time. One of the concerns I do have is that, particularly when it requires managing forests on private lands. Well, some of us, I know some of the islands do not necessarily have legislative strength, for managing, private forests, and we depend, a lot on the awareness, and education, that to sort of create an understanding of, the importance of the forests and why we would not want, a depletion, of our forest resources. On protected forests, we have, greater control, as to what is there. But the private forest we see as there is always a threat of development, threat of sometimes it may be, agriculture, and there is always the issue of, livelihoods and sustenance, and somehow private forest owners may not necessarily see significant value in terms of a value that is going to support, their livelihoods. So the intention is more often, to try and convert, that forest into some sort of use that would create, greater livelihood opportunities for them. I'm not sure if the strategy would have present, some way of, trying to deal with, issues of that nature.
Right.
Um,
So, Alvin, I can actually start now. Of course, in the interest of brevity, I did not share everything.
Yes.
But I want to let you know that yes, it is a part of the strategy. In fact, to read directly from the strategy, a key proposed activity is enhancing climate resilient forest management on private lands. And we are noting that it's the same technical issues that applies, but we actually are also acknowledging the difficulty and the need to establish national mechanisms to incorporate this to private lands. So we've recognized the issue, but a specific solution, and I'm sure others perhaps have success stories how they've engaged, and perhaps Klaus can speak to it, but I just want to raise the point that it was noted and recognized as a strong need within the strategy. Klaus, would you like to add?
Thank you.
Yeah, I can add one point, and I think this is something typical for the kind of the history of the land use, and especially in the English-speaking Caribbean, there are large areas of public land which are being kind of occupied legally or not legally. Then the question, and if that is another one issue, the other part is that there's a strong prerogative of private ownership. And this is linked to the constitutions of the country. So basically somebody who has land and forest can do with it what the person would like to do. And that's definitely, there's little inside the national constitutions or the national juridical system which allows basically the government to stop the change of use in a particular country. And I think that's an issue which needs to be addressed, but that goes beyond basically what the strategy can do. I see another hand. Christian, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Greetings from Puerto Rico. I was wondering regarding the strategy, if there was some kind of part of the strategy that discusses the lack of capacity that we have in the region, because I mean, a lot of this work is related on forestry, and a lot of the forestry work is related to botany. And rather than gaining botanists, we keep losing them. Some of them retire, they don't pass their knowledge on, and we're never going to move forward with producing plants if the basic knowledge on plants is going away, or I mean, not enough to the whole region. And that's one of the questions that I have. And the other one is, I see this kind of forum in English, which I don't have any problem, but I feel that if we don't do them in trilingual languages, we are limiting the capacity of the Cuban people to connect. They don't have access to using Zoom, so that's a limitation that they have. And they're the largest island and the more contributor to anything that we can think of. And not only this forum, but many other forums that I participate, they're always missing because they don't have access to Zoom. It's nothing to, related to our things at all, but it's just something to keep in mind that, we're losing opportunities of reaching to other people by making things in a single language and not accessible to the people in the largest country.
So I will jump in because this is an issue both Klaus and I are a bit passionate about. But just to say, for instance, I'm actually a botanist and all I do these days is manage projects. So you're absolutely right. Of foresters or botanists, we're a dying breed and that's not good for the region. Yeah. In terms of the strategy, there are sections that do deal with capacity building under the different themes, but just to say, yes, it is recognized. At the very least, one of the things we hope to push through the strategy, if not formal training, but communities of practice at least, where we can discuss issues as practitioners in the field. And I hear your point regarding, of course, the need for different language aspects. Klaus, I know you have comments on this as well.
Okay, the capacity issue was also mentioned by Dylan from the COP15, and I think that's definitely a very valid point. And your point, Christian, that you said we need to go back and re-emphasize kind of what we call traditional knowledge. And I think that is it. Knowledge about botany is something definitely which is part of it. The same applies, for example, to very kind of baseline or base forestry knowledge, which are dwindling in the region. We saw in the region the setting up of the forestry departments. Let's say the Trinidad was the first one in 1901, but then the other departments on the OECS countries were set up in the 1970s, 80s, and the people who then were sent on training are now retiring. So in many cases on the islands, the forestry departments are basically lacking the presence of foresters. And that is something which needs to be definitely addressed. And it is something now which then could be addressed, for example, when GEF projects are being, global environment facility projects are being designed. That is something that the people who are designing them and also the GEF focal points who are basically pushing for the development of such projects should underline in their requests to the GEF Secretariat and make a point there that it will be difficult to manage sustainable the forest if you are lacking the people. And that's what's a long-term investment and it needs to be started.
Okay, I think Aditi is trying to raise some of the comments that were in the chat. So Aditi, if you want to go ahead and raise them up.
Yes, so we have a few comments in the chat, but I'll start with Daniel from Trinidad. He's asking, how does this affect efforts in Trinidad and Tobago and the anthropological degradation we are experiencing presently?
It speaks to it in general in terms of what we need to do to manage the forests. So it could be that as part of our advocacy as CSOs, Daniel, I mean, of course, you're a CSO like us, we need to not only highlight general concerns, but the climate change concerns if we don't protect those forests. But I hear you, and yes, that continues to be an issue across all of our islands. Klaus?
Yeah.
One of the key things is, for example, the question in Trinidad with forest fire, especially along the northern range. The more people with high population density and a high level of stress towards the forest, every year it burns. And that is definitely something which needs to be and will be addressed in the light of changing climate, because it's not going to get better on its own. It is likely to get worse, and so we need to prepare for it. And this forest fire issue always has to be looked at in combination with invasive and grass species, because it's a kind of an unholy mix of forest fire and then combined with invasive species, which makes the matter so critical.
And continuing with the chat, we have Hayden asking, I would be interested in learning how to follow the output of this program. How will updates or progress be shared? Hayden being from Grenada.
So that is something we need to give a little bit more thought to. Certainly we'll be tracking it from the Canary end through the projects that we are involved in. And we do habitually do mapping exercises, so we can get a sense of what is being done or not as well. So, but yes, I hear you. We need to see what is actually being done directly or even indirectly related to the material we've presented today. Yeah.
Yes, and continuing with the chat, Ina from Jamaica is asking, how are local communities' voices centered in this strategy? There tends to be a natural tension between the priorities of forestry and the priorities and needs of local communities. She's an ethnobotanist, and that field is not well represented in the Caribbean either, similar to botany. Ina from Jamaica.
Klaus, do you want to start? Because I actually want to disagree. To say that there is this participatory approach. I mean, of course, there are specific instances that we may not be aware of. And I see Marilyn has put on her video. I feel she wants to jump in here. Marilyn?
Marlene?
Let me see. Yes. Yes, I agree with you, Natalie. There has been some effort. There is that problem. But we do have quite a few small groups and large NGOs also who do participate in not just environmental, the wider scale, but forests, ecosystem management, advocacy. A lot of them focus on the educational aspect of it, getting awareness out and getting projects to work alongside some of the government entities. As I mentioned earlier, there is this participatory budgeting project that CANARA is doing now to look at the involvement. And when you're listening to the comments, some of the comments are that where the non-government people are involved is when they're planning the higher scale plan, like the national plans, the forest sector plan, the biodiversity plan, the government's national plan for Jamaica. And they're involved in that. Where they diverge now is when it is decided what aspect of that plan is done in a particular year or a particular 3-year program. They're not involved in that. So the government agency then decides, yes, we're going to be doing activity A, B, C under strategy B, and this is what we're doing, and we ask funding for that. The CSOs are saying they want to be part of that process of deciding which of the activities are done. And also more dialogue to say, okay, so if the forestry department / NEPA are doing activity 1 and 2 and cannot afford to do activity 3, one of the CSOs could say, go look funding to do 1 or 2 could do activity 3. So whereas it's not at its best, they're coming along.
Yes, and I would like to underscore that because it is now, I think in the Caribbean, we have gotten quite far now in acknowledging civil society's participation in public processes. I think there's no need to explain the benefits of it. However, in the practice, it's sometimes more difficult to get it through. But I think I definitely see a certain progress there, and I would basically do recommend to everybody to continue to pull the same line in order to get further with it.
Just want to read out a couple more comments from your chat.
Yeah.
So Dr. Howard Nelson is agreeing with Klaus, just wanted to support your call for revitalizing forest conservation capacity within the region's management agency. This erosion has been taking place over a long time, and the CSO NGO community needs the support. And following that comment, Chris says, good point for consideration, Klaus, regarding capacity building. For Jeff projects, there definitely needs to be considerations for specialization of capacity building for professionals. Foundational forestry degree types, say at the BSc level, will be difficult, but via Jeff projects, we can strengthen the technical exchanges between countries in structured learning opportunities.
I think I see Marilyn's hand up.
Yes, Klaus, I just wanted to, Natalie, I miss it on the Mentimeter. But the whole thing about research, which came up earlier as key, I think that is one of the areas that we really need to look at. Whereas, because we have the issue of climate change coming in, and I don't think our research programs are now as, aggressive, productive, not on the forefront as say before. And with the potential changes in how we used to put certain types of forests. Somebody mentioned the montane forest. If the temperature rising and things are increasing in there, what are we doing? What is the shift? I mean, we literally, I say, just move them up the hill. But at what point in time, which species are going to do best? Which species is going to survive where? And I don't think we're catching that up as fast as we should, considering that the issue is not holding back. And the second point is someone that asked about mangroves. And to this point, I think Klaus mentioned it. In Jamaica, there is the Jeff-funded project, which is just about to start to look at mangrove management, because with the EU-funded support, we did a lot of work in Jamaica to identify where the mangroves are, what's the health of the mangroves, and then now producing a mangrove management plan, which the Jeff project is going to assist in implementing. So the mangroves, which are crucial and were not recognized earlier, are now part of the whole thinking in the forest department. So we used to go to court and you tell the judge that the man cut out the mangroves and they draw blank. Did he move any trees? Yes, some mangroves still draw blank. So we're getting past that stage to recognize that the mangroves are forests.
Another important aspect is that forests are definitely something we have around us, and we have seems to be a lack of being observant. We have not been good at documenting what is the normal, what is now around us. And this is very important, for example, to see and to document changes. I remember that from the discussion 30 or 40 years back in Germany, what is the effect of acid rain? And then all of a sudden the foresters ask themselves, what is it a normal needle look like? What does a normal leaf look like? And then we figured out it wasn't really documented. So this is something now we need to go back to and maybe set up a strong network of sample plots where we can measure, let's say, describe the forest and then see how it evolves over the years. It is not really complicated to do that. It requires relatively little resources to do it, but it requires a lot of discipline to do it, to keep record of these data, to store these data in a place. And we have now excellent electronic versions to store them, to distribute them, and make them accessible. So these are many small things we can do in order to start a practical research program on the islands. And then we should develop and forms and fashions how to generate some kind of avenues to exchange these experiences.
Klaus, before we move on, I just want to acknowledge Dr. Howard Nelson, who Canary actually has two forestry program advisors. Marilyn is one and Howard is the other. So thank you for being here, Howard. I let him off the hook and I told Marilyn she had to do remarks instead. So, okay.
Next time is yours, Howard.
Yep, definitely, definitely.
Just have one more question. Well, yeah,
go ahead,
more.
Aditi.
Sorry. Christian, yeah. I'm wondering about FAO policies to update the definition of forests, 10% canopy. So many monoculture plantings for timber being considered forests when they are technically a farm of trees, despite they could be sustainable for many ecosystem functions, and this will be missing. So does he want to say, he's saying many scientists dispute this definition. I don't know if Christian is, I'm seeing his video on if he wants to further elaborate, but yes.
So Klaus, I don't know if you'll be able to speak to that. Some issues regarding the definition of forests as per the FAO definitions.
Now, this definition is basically, let's say, the FAO definition, or actually we can't really say that we use a definition in FAO, yes, which is very broad, but in truth and fact, it the key point is that each country defines what is they understand as forest. And then we kind of streamline and compare that in when we do our forest resources assessment, basically that is based on the description of and the definition of forest in countries.
Yeah, and add to that clause, it would then within the country determine when we're referring to the trees that are planted as a separate plantation forest, and that gets a different measurement from the closed broadleaf, the disturbed broadleaf, the dry, the limestone, and there's assessed and determined and then followed up in different categories. And that's the category we use in Jamaica. So you do have a set that says plantation forest. But when you start to look at things like closed weeds forest, what it is used for, why it is there, are different strategies applied to the different forests.
What FAO does when it comes to these, let's say, global summaries, it kind of bundles, documents what each country is understanding of forest, and then it kind of develops a cross-tabulation in order to be able to cross-reference what were the national definitions with, and how does it fit with the FAO worldwide definition, which we use in order to kind of summarize the data from the different countries. I would like to take the opportunity. We had one comment, and we haven't spoken to that, is the need of setting seed banks. And I think that's definitely a very valid point to take into consideration. How do we preserve the gene pool of the species and in the Caribbean? Gene banks is really, or seed banks is really the very last resort. The best form of preserving genetic gene pool is basically in situ, and this is done normally through a network of protected areas. Now, when you speak about, let's say, agricultural seed banks, then again, many things needs to be kind of preserved in seed plots. And I think Trinidad is a very good example of preservation of, for example, the cocoa trees. But we should be careful not to put too much hope in seed banks. Seed banks can hardly ever really capture the huge variety we have in the nature there. So the focus when it comes about to preserve the genetic gene pool is we need to focus, basically do that through a system of protected areas and preserving this gene pools in their very nature.
Klaus, I'm not seeing any more questions, and I know you and I want to do a wrap up and a way forward so that everybody could go see Morocco beat France. But apart from that, I would like to ask Aaron to share the results of the quick survey that we've just done. It'd be nice to see what the results are coming up. And then Klaus and I will close off. Okay. Oh, that's a little difficult to see. Aaron, can you read out a little bit? So what are the least represented areas? What are the ones that, you know, there's only one response to?
Okay, so we have the least response being 0, developing non-timber forest products, standards, and certifications. Then we have persons who answered 1. There's a tie between protecting forest germplasm, determining climate resilient non-timber forest products and timber products, building capacity for timber harvesting and processing, especially for small-scale logging operations in Caribbean islands.
Right.
Green urban areas, developing and updating disaster management frameworks for the forestry sector, and supporting local forest-based enterprises and CSOs to manage disaster risk and rebuild and recommence their work after disaster events.
Okay. So what I was actually looking for was where there was less emphasis. So I think both bits of info are useful. The areas that we are currently in the region doing a lot of work in, and we will of course share this as well, so you guys can get a sense of what's been going on. There's a second question, Iran. What have we left out, or what haven't been considered as well? Money ruling despite protests, genetic biodiversity. Okay, we need to understand plant-animal interactions, especially pollinators, that are much needed to restore forests, breaking political boundaries and language barrier. Okay, I hear you, and we note that concern, yes. Financing and mechanisms to capitalize on the green economy. Okay, so thanks very much for highlighting that point. And I will just now go to a way forward in terms of Canary. I just want to acknowledge, Aditi, there was one more point in the comment. There was a reference to a paper for seed banks and the usefulness in terms of genetics. Thanks for sharing that, Christian. We will take a look at that. Thanks for bringing that point to the fore. Okay, so let me share screen, and then Klaus will close us off. Okay. So we just did the second poll, and just in terms of way forward. Hello.
Yes, we
Okay,
can hear you.
Okay, great. So very immediately, we, as in early January, we will be sharing not just the results of the poll, but we do a little bit of a summary of today, including some of the issues that were brought forward today. Canary is implementing this strategy. As we've mentioned, there's a strong alignment with our strategic plan, both our resilience and biodiversity and ecosystems program, and we will be moving forward. We've actually done a little work on some concept notes regarding the disaster management angle, and that's something that we will give in a little bit more attention to. But overall, we just want to make sure that people know that this framework is out there. If you want to talk to us about it, partner, whatever we can do to advance the key issues and needs of the region. And before I turn over to Klaus, just to say thanks to all of you for attending. We really appreciate your support, especially our colleagues joining us from COP15, and all of you who have also made time to be with us here today. And I turn over to Klaus now. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. Yes, my basically recommendation to you is kind of use this strategy when you think and contemplating project ideas. You may find a framework there which will allow you to strategize and also to structure what you want to do. You have kind of access, let's say, from the position of the countries, you have access to FAO as normal, but you also have access to a wide range of kind of international funding opportunities, and those are always kind of structured the same way. And that is that there is a national authority for the EU, for example. It's called the National Authorizing Officer. For the Green Climate Fund, it is the NDA, the National Designated Authority. Jeff has focal points, and these are basically the focal points in your country who you have to approach if you would like to have the financing and financial support from these international bodies to design projects. So that is something basically in your country, in your constituency, you have to talk to these people, and once they basically then with their support, you can approach FAO and also Canary, and then see to develop, for example, those Jeff project, Green Climate Fund project, Green Climate Readiness projects. All of them basically follow the same pattern, and we hope that this strategy which Canary and FAO have provided you with will help you to structure and to put you in the position to approach these entities in order to address the problems you have in front of you. I want to thank Renata Clark, Natalie Budram, Marilyn Hadley for their contribution, and not forgetting Dillian Palmer from the COP15. Thank you very much for your presentations. To all participants, thank you for joining us from COP and from the islands of the Caribbean. And thank you very much for being part of this exercise. And we from Canary and FAO, we wish you make good use of it, and we are looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.